Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1992 direct-to-video animated film Tiny Toon Adventures, How I Spent My Vacation. Now, this is a film that I definitely have some fondness for and some nostalgia associated with it because, like with the cartoon Tiny Toon Adventures, uh, I watched this a decent amount of times growing up. I think I might have had it on VHS. If I didn't, I definitely watched it any time that it would air on TV. And to me, it still holds up pretty well. I think it's a great showcase of the strengths of Tiny Toon Adventures. I think, in all honesty, you could watch this movie and you would get an idea of what Tiny Toons is and why people are a fan of it, and decide whether or not you want to watch more. It's a really great stepping stone, so to speak, for Tiny Toons. And I think that it honestly features some of the stronger segments of the show. Uh, and it's one of those films, though, that definitely feels like more of a selection of shorts that are just slapped together with a very kind of flimsy connecting narrative. But despite that, there's a lot of fun to be had with this film. Now, before I get around to sharing more of my thoughts on it, though, I would like to give a special shout out to Ryan for requesting yet another review. Tiny Toon Adventures, How I Spent My Vacation, it has a ton of directors because you had multiple different directors who directed multiple different segments for the film. So you've got Rich Arons, Ken Boyer, Kent Butterworth, Barry Caldwell, Alfred Gimeno, Art Leonardi, and Brian Vaughns. And all of them did a really great job collectively when it comes to their direction for this, when it comes to the various different sequences, to the point where I couldn't really tell that there was a different sort of perspective or a different vision that a director had versus another that could create some kind of chaos visually. That didn't really happen. Things were still very measured, still very sturdy, and didn't feel like they were shaky in terms of a bunch of different directors with their visions just clashing with one another. And each segment, each vignette had the right amount of energy that you would expect from a Tiny Toons movie. The framing matched exactly the kind of cartoon style framing that you would see in other episodes of the show. And so did the direction. The direction was still very over the top and creative and imaginative, and when it comes to his camera angles and the perspectives and the ways that it showcased the animation and each segment. So definitely from a visual perspective, the direction I felt was quite dynamic and quite good overall when for the film. Now, it's written by Paul Dini, Nicholas Hollander, Tom Rugger, and Sherry Stoner. And this actually came out, I believe, around the time of the second season of the show. So this was still right in the thick of Tiny Toons. And the experience all these writers had definitely is showcased here with this screenplay because they're just so right at home. They're so familiar with the characters, with the world of Tiny Toons. Nothing really feels like it's that out of place. It's just an extended episode of the show in a lot of ways. And I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing. I think that for this kind of movie and for what it's trying to be, I actually think that's a positive. just like it was for the other Tiny Toon specials that came out after How I Spent My Vacation. So the film, it pretty much deals with the cast of Tiny Toons on their summer vacation. So you have Babs and Buster, who start getting into water pistol fights with each other, and eventually that escalates into Babs flooding Acme Acres, and then the two bunnies, along with Byron Bassett, they wind up involved in an adventure where they get washed down to the southern U.S. And that's where they encounter singing possums and alligators and bullfrogs and all these other animals and creatures that are trying to eat them or cause their summer vacation to end early and permanently. And in typical, Babs and Buster fashion, they're both on each other's nerves. Buster is trying to do various different things in order to get Babs wet and upset her. He's also doing the whole thing too, where he's almost getting to the point where he is willingly accepting her affections for him, but then pulls out and pranks her instead. It's definitely, in my opinion, a really good story for Babs and Buster, and a really good way to show the strengths of their characters. And I would say that the segment with Plucky and Hampton is the stronger segment overall, but this is still a good segment. Because of the strength of Babs and Buster, and the whole idea of them being a fish out of water in the South, and the typical Tiny Toon humor is also very prevalent in this portion of the film, especially when it comes to like the pop culture references. There's a really clever Superman cameo in their segment. Babs and Buster, they fall off a waterfall, and they actually reuse a quote from Superman the movie when Lois is talking to Superman and says, who's got you? Because Babs is Buster is telling Babs that I got you, and then Babs tells him back, but who's got you? And right after that, Superman shows up and saves them. But then Babs and Buster kind of start busting his balls and talk about how he's in the wrong movie, and then he's just like, fine, and then just drops them. And I thought that was honestly really funny and unexpected. I was not expecting Superman to show up. I forgot that Superman had a cameo in this. But yeah, I will admit that this segment is not as good as the Plucky Duck segment. The Plucky Duck segment is the best segment out of this movie. And every time it goes to that segment, the film just perks up even more than it already was up until that point. Because it's not like it was flat by any means when it comes to the Babs and Buster Bunny segment when they're down south. But when Plucky decides to hitch a ride with Hampton's family as they drive to Happy World Land, that is the pinnacle of this film and of this story, because it's the strongest segment overall, and it's the one a lot of Tiny Toon fans remember the most for a very legitimate reason, because it's a really clever, really funny segment. Plucky and Hampton, they're just as dynamic of a duo as ever, and Plucky and his various desperate attempts to try to get onto the trip to Happy World Land are funny. And then when he actually gets to go with them, it's not as easy of a ride there as Plucky would expect. He's got to deal with Hampton's family, who are insufferable and irritating in various different ways, or smelly. He's got to deal with all these other obstacles and things that wind up popping up along their ride to Happy World Land, including a hitchhiker who is a crazed psychopath who even wears a hockey mask and swings a chainsaw around. And eventually they get to Happy World Land, and you see all the rides from their perspective when they're on the monorail, and then they wind up just going back on the monorail all the way to the exit. They get off the monorail and then they just leave. And that is just such a hilarious thing to me. It is so funny. And Plucky's reaction is the reaction everybody would have at that moment. Hampton and his family, they're like, oh, all right, that was fun. Let's go home. And then Plucky's like, wait, what? We're not going to ride at any rides? Like, what? And then Hampton's family is like, yeah, because you got to save something for later, for the next time that we come to Happy World Land. And then Plucky's like, the next time? But we're right here. So yeah, that was really clever, really funny. The other segments, they're of varying quality. The Elmira segment, in typical Tiny Toons fashion, is the weakest one, because there's not really a whole lot you can do with Elmira, who this time around, she goes to a nature park and she terrorizes the wild animals there, and even rips off the pelt of one of them and starts wearing it, and then is acting like she's an animal, and then grabbing all the lion cubs and the zebras and holding them captive. And eventually the news gets to the lion, who's the king of the jungle, and he tries to put a stop to her, but of course it doesn't work. And then the animals, they decide to just leave her there. They actually steal some guy's car and drive off. And I'm like, okay, all right. It's zany, but not in particularly the most funny way. And as usual, she doesn't get her comeuppance, which is the one thing that always annoys me about these Elmira segments. Like, she rarely ever gets a comeuppance or gets punished appropriately for her actions. She just gets away with it, and it's not necessarily something that I think is deserved, let alone funny. Then you have this other thing with Fifi, who's trying to get an autograph from this movie star called Johnny Pugh, but eventually she gets to meet him, but he's not at all who she thinks he is, and he's a punk. And then you have this other stuff with Foulmouth and Shirley the Loon, where they see this film called Skunkophobia, which is definitely a play on arachnophobia, and Foulmouth just will not shut up during the movie, and when he eventually gets thrown into the movie, and then the people in the movie actually start giving him shit, that was pretty funny. And then they kick him out. They throw him out of the movie screen. That was also quite witty and clever. And speaking of witty and clever, it has one of the best THX sound trailer parodies I've seen next to The Simpsons. It's just hilarious. They show the THX logo, but of course it's not THX, it's something close to it, and then it just completely blows people away out of the theater, smashes people's teeth, and then it does the whole thing where the audience is now deaf. Like, I thought that was great. And then you have the ending where a lot of the different villains or conflicts or different sort of things that were going on with Plucky and Hampton in their adventure and Buster and Babs in theirs, they wind up colliding with one another. And Buster, Babs, Byron and Banjo, they wind up getting on a minecart and they run into the convict with the chainsaw and the hockey mask who's going after them. Eventually, they wind up getting away from him because he falls off the rail to his doom, and then they fall into a plot hole, which then leads them back to Wacky Land, through Wacky Land and back to Acme Acres, and then they return to the Luniversity for the start of the fall semester, and that's the story. That's all, folks. It started out with a musical number about them talking about going on their summer vacation, and then it ends with another musical number about them going back to school, and all of them have returned home. Plucky and Hampton, they came back from the vacation, and Hampton is forced to watch the Hampton family slides for what feels like an eternity. And Buster and Babs fall into the plot hole. And that definitely was something that was kind of a lazy sort of thing, but it's still something that feels at home with Tiny Toons. Like, Tiny Toons has definitely done stuff like that before, so it wasn't necessarily something that upset me that much. And yeah, it's a lot of fun, in all honesty. I think the majority of the segments, except for their Myra segment, are relatively strong. Some are better than others, but most of them are still pretty fun to watch and have some clever pop culture references. They have a dig at Roseanne at one point, which I thought was pretty funny. They had another bit in the movie theater where you see all these different movie stars there. You get the Superman cameo. And I think it definitely does provide a lot of opportunities for all the different Tiny Toon characters to shine in the Tiny Toon movie. So, yeah, I think they did a good job with the script for what it is. It's definitely just a bunch of segments thrown together, but, I mean, that's what the show was in a lot of ways. So it makes sense that they would lean on that familiarity for the direct-to-video movie. And the voice cast is terrific. I mean, this is just a stupendous voice cast in general. Charlie Adler is Buster, Tress MacNeille is Babs, and a bunch of other characters. Gail Matthius is Shirley the Loon. Kath Soucie is Fifi. Don Messick is Hampton. Joe Alaskey is Plucky Duck. Maurice LaMarche as Dizzy Devil. Frank Welker. Rob Paulsen. Cree Summer. Candy Milo, and so on. Even Edie McClurg actually had a voiceover. She voiced Winnie Pig, Hampton's mom, and Jonathan Winters was the voice of Hampton's dad. And then he also voiced Superman, which I thought was fun. It was fun to hear those two. I think, and I swear, I think it's Ernest Borgnine who voices a frog. A bullfrog in this. I could be wrong. It might not be him at all, but it sounds exactly like him. But I don't see him in the credits, so it might just be he sounds like Ernest Borgnine, but it's actually just a different voiceover actor who's just doing the voice. But yeah, strong voice cast. The music is also full of, that Tiny Toon mirth and mayhem. The overall pacing is pretty quick and definitely doesn't feel like it's dragging its feet. It's like an hour and 20 something minutes, and it goes by pretty quick. So yeah, I genuinely feel that Tiny Toon Adventures: How I Spent My Vacation is honestly a little bit of a gem. I mean, I don't see a lot of people talking about it, and I think it's a lot better than some of the other direct-to-video cartoon films that Warner Brothers has done. And I can see why it's definitely got its fans, and why it was so popular when it came out on video. It was a massive hit. And it was actually, I think, the first ever direct-to-video film for a Warner Animation. So it actually represented a pretty significant milestone for Warner Brothers at the time. But yeah, that's just my thoughts on Tiny Toon Adventures: How I Spent My Vacation. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you later. See ya.